like to welcome you to the Elkins Ranch. We are a working cattle ranch here. We've got about 300 head longhorn on the ranch right now. Most of them are in our far west pasture. We do have a few in this pasture, so we may see them. I don't know, you never know. This ranch originally belonged to the first rancher in the Texas Panhandle, a man by the name of Charles Goodnight. He originally was from Illinois, came out here and became a Texas Ranger. He wanted to fight the Indians. Well, he did until he met them, and then he liked them too well to fight them. But he met a wealthy Irishman by the name of John Adair, and they decided to go into the cattle business. So together they established the J.A. Ranch in about 1875. It was a little spread, about 1,325,000 acres. Took in most of Paladura Canyon. Charlie Goodnight was, I guess you could say, an entrepreneur. Way ahead of his time in many ways, quite a businessman. He had another partner, in fact, a man by the name of Oliver Loving. Together they established the Goodnight Loving Cattle Trail, which goes from Texas through New Mexico up into Colorado and over to Dodge City, Kansas. Charlie Goodnight is one of the men responsible for saving the American buffalo. He had his own private herd of buffalo, about 12,000 head strong, that he kept here in Paladura Canyon. He's also the man who invented the chuck wagon, and he built the first American side saddle for his wife, Miss Molly. It's kind of interesting the way he acquired all this land out here. Right after the last battle in the Red River War, the railroad came out here and claimed about a 250-mile wide swath of land all across the Panhandle. Once they decided where to put the tracks, they started selling off the rest of the land. So Charlie Goodnight started buying sections of land, but he didn't buy them the way most people did. He would buy sections of land in a big circle, and he would join those big circles, and in doing that, he surrounded a whole lot of land. Well, the railroad, or actually Charlie Goodnight, went to the railroad after he had 3, 4, 5 of these big circles of land. And he said, "What are you people going to do with all this land that's inside what I own?" They said, "We're going to sell it." He said, "Good luck. I won't give anybody access to it." Well, about 2 months later, the railroad came to Charlie Goodnight and said, "You know, we'll make you a real good deal on all this land that's inside what you own." He said, "All right, make me an offer." They said, "Well, what did you pay for all the land that you now own?" He said, "You know good and well what I paid. I bought it from you." They said, "All right." You paid $1 an acre. He said, "That's right, $1 an acre." They said, "We'll sell you all that land inside what you own for 75 cents an acre." He said, "Gentlemen, when you're serious, come back and talk to me, but until then, get off my land." Well, they came back in a few months, said, "Well, we got a better offer for you." He said, "Okay." They said, 65 cents an acre. He said, "Gentlemen, get off my land." They said, "Now, Charlie, come on, give us a break. That's a good deal and you know it." He said, "It's not a good deal." They said, "Well, why don't you make us an offer?" He said, "All right, nickel an acre." They said, "You've got to be joking." He said, "Get off my land." A few weeks later, they came back. They said, "All right, 50 cents an acre." He said, 15 cents an acre. Well, they left. A few weeks later, they came back. They said, "Now, Mr. Goodnight, this is our final offer. We will not go any lower than this. 40 cents an acre." He said, "No, won't do it." They said, "Well, what do you think is fair?" He said, "My final offer, and I won't go any higher, 25 cents an acre." they settled for 25 cents an acre.
Wow.
So most of his land that he owned out here, he got for 25 cents an acre when it was going for $1 an acre.
Wow.
So you have to admit he was a pretty smart man.
So how many acres is out here?
Well, if it were a flat surface, it would be 3,420 on this ranch. But with the canyon here, it's closer to 4,200 acres.
That's not too bad.
It's not a big spread by Texas standards by any means. But it's 5.5 square miles, which is not bad. The ranch goes from the paved road you came in on 217, 2.5 miles across the canyon and 3 miles up the canyon. Most people believe that Paladura Canyon is owned by the state. Less than 30% of it is owned by the state of Texas. More than 70% is privately owned. And the Elkins own 3 miles of it. The first European to see this canyon was a Spaniard back in 1541, a man by the name of Coronado. He came out here looking for the 7 lost cities of gold. I think it's safe to say he didn't find them, but it didn't stop him from looking. He's also the man who gave the canyon its name, Paladuro. Paladuro is Spanish for hardwood, and he named it that because of all the cedar that we have out here. Well, cedar here in the U.S. is not a hardwood, but they tell me it is in Spain. So he called it Hardwood Canyon, Paladura Canyon. I always believed he had called it Paladura or hardwood because of the mesquite that we have. But mesquite is not a native of Texas.
Really?
No, it's native of old Mexico. And when Coronado came up here, he brought 300 head of Mexican longhorns with him to feed his men with. And those longhorns had been down in Mexico eating the beans off the mesquite tree. So every place they left a deposit, we had a mesquite tree
What
growing.
goes in must come out.
Now, the Indians, however, after these mesquites got a start, they liked the mesquite for several reasons. One is the needles or the thorns on the mesquite make good needles. So they could use the needles to pin things together, sew them together with. They also like the wood because it's a hard wood, makes a great bed of coals for cooking. And they like the beans on the mesquite. They use those beans to make a tea with. They'd also roast the beans, grind them up, and put them in soups and stews. But the main reason they liked them is because they could collect those beans, and in the winter when grass was scarce for the horses, they'd feed the beans to the horses. Now, something that I was not aware of is that all animals, even those who normally don't eat anything but meat, will eat the beans off the mesquite trees. The reason is because they're very high in protein. Ranchers tell me that a good grazing grass is 9 to 11% protein. The grass that we have here on this ranch is buffalo grass. The buffalo grass is 11 to 14% protein. So even when this buffalo grass looks like it's not much good, it's still a pretty high percent of protein. Mesquite beans are 32% protein. And that's why we have so many mesquites in Texas, because all the animals will eat them. And that's how they're spread. In fact, there are only 2 things that will germinate a mesquite bean. One is fire, and the other is the rumen in the digestive system of an animal. So unless those beans go through a fire or through an animal, they're not going to grow. Now usually, people start asking if I've lost my mind or the direction, because this tour is supposed to take place in Paladura Canyon. People want to know what we're doing wandering through a cow pasture. Well, this is the best way to get to our starting point.
Well, and that's why you're the trail guide.
That's
You
right.
know where the heck you're going.
Well, hopefully, anyway. This tour is called Hidden Spring Canyon. And that's where we're headed, to Hidden Springs. Now, there's a reason we call it Hidden Springs, and it's because there is a spring in here that runs year round. It's kind of hard to find, so
It's hidden.
there's the name, Hidden Springs. If you look over here in the distance, you see a windmill over there? That's the location where one of the first windmills in the Panhandle was. Charlie Goodnight had the windmill put there. The windmill that he built has been gone for many years, but they keep putting newer windmills there. And it pumped water for years and years. About 9 or 10 years ago, the old windmill quit pumping. So the Elkins called some people out to look at it, see if it could be fixed. Their reply was, sure, we can fix it. Not much wrong with the windmill. The problem is it's caving in down under the ground. But for about $8,000, we can get you pumping water again. We just can't guarantee it'll work more than a month or 6 weeks. Well, they chose not to fix it. Since that windmill has quit pumping, the little spring down here in Hidden Springs has been putting out more water. So that windmill was pumping water from the same source as this spring. Well, since it's putting out more water, we haven't been able to get back to the spring. So much water coming out of there, and we've had so much rain this past year that we can't get back to the spring anymore. But that's all right. This little finger of the canyon, this little box canyon here, has so much water in it that we have some very large trees out here. Now, most people will tell you there are no trees in the Texas Panhandle. There are. We just keep them underground, same place we keep our water. We don't want people to think that we've got trees. But this is a very unusual little finger off Taladura Canyon because of the amount of water and the size of the trees. Some of the largest trees, cedar trees, that I've seen in the state of Texas are in this finger of the canyon. So that's where we're headed. And incidentally, on a tour I took earlier, we saw a 10-point buck still in velvet.
Well, let's go find him.
Well, he's back over there somewhere. But we could, as cool as it is today, we could
There's a
see
doe to our
something here.
left. Right up there on the hill to the left, there's a little doe.
Yeah. Well, there's usually a buck that stays over in here too. It's about an 8-point. Right down there is your first look into Hidden Spring. And as you can see, there are some good-sized trees down in there. We're going to be going down to the bottom of Hidden Spring here. And we'll be crossing the little creek bed several times.
Now that's not a mule, is it? Mule deer? Or
Yeah,
what?
it's mule deer.
Okay.
We do have both, though, mule deer and whitetail.
I thought the ears looked a little large for a whitetail.
We even have a cross between the two.
Really?
Very interesting looking critters.
Well, you want to talk about an interesting cross. There's some people up the road from where we live that they cross longhorns to bison. And that's an interesting looking critter.
Well, Charlie Goodnight was the first man to do that. He called them cattle.
Hello.
All right. This little road that we're going down here, the old logging trail, they cut this in 1929. Decided to come down here and log some cedar fence posts out of here. So they got their little trucks down here and got them loaded with fence posts, and the trucks wouldn't pull the hill. So they had to unload the trucks, drag them out by chain and cable, then drag the fence posts up. Well, they did that for about a year, finally gave up on it, decided it wasn't worth it. That was back when cedar fence posts were about a dime a piece. Today they're about $14 a piece. Well, we decided since the road was here, we might as well use it. Of course, it's not quite as steep now as it was back then. We've had to grade it so often because of how bad it washes after a rain. The little spring down in here is back up this draw to the left. We used to be able to drive to it, but we managed to get 3 Jeeps stuck back up in there this past summer, and so we decided not to try it anymore. We're hoping, though, we can fix the road and drive back up there too. It's kind of interesting to see it. Now, you probably are not going to see a lot of water down here, but trust me, it's here. They tell me for cedar trees this size, it takes between 30 to 40 gallons of water per day per tree.
Wow.
So just from the number of trees down in here, you can tell there's a lot of water down in here. And even with what they took out of here back in the 1929, 1930, they still didn't make much of a dent in it down here. There's still an awful lot of trees. And some of them, large, very, very large trees. Now, a lot of time down in here, and I just want to tell you while it's on my mind. If you look up from, on these higher places, sometimes we'll see the aoudad sheep.
I was going to ask you, do any of them come out here or are there any on the ranch?
Oh yeah, plenty. First thing I'd like to show you is this big old cottonwood tree. Big one here. If you look up at the top, it looks like it's been broken and one limb points off.
Looks like a T.
Yeah. Well, we don't know exactly what caused that, but several years ago I had some Comanche Indian elders out here on tour. And one of them said, maybe I can help you with that. He said, back in the old days when our people would go into an area, if the village was following the scouts would find a small sapling and break the top and point it in the direction they were going. That way the village knew which way to travel. He said, now I can't guarantee you that's what happened to that tree, but it could be. Well, we don't know for sure, but it's a good story, so
Hey.
If that's not what happened, it should have been. It is a big old cottonwood.
It is a beautiful tree.
And you only find cottonwood where there's a lot of water. Geologists tell me that back in the time the Coronado came through here, there was probably 15 to 20 foot of water running through this little finger of the canyon continuously. They say it was much wetter here back in those days. About the mid-1600s, it began to dry up. The weather began to change out in here. And by about 1720, it was kind of like it is now, semi-arid. In fact, 2 of Coronado's men who wrote journals about their travels out in here said that Hardwood Canyon, Paladura Canyon, was located between hundreds of lakes. Well, there aren't hundreds of lakes around here, but there are playa lakes, mini playa lakes, low-lying areas that fill up after a rain. So if it was much wetter back in those days, there would have been hundreds of lakes all around here. So we know from those journals that this is the canyon that he discovered and named Paladura. We also know it because we find, or they have found, Spanish armor and stuff. If you look up on this cliff, you'll see a cedar tree hanging up there. We call that the hanging cedar because it's been hanging around up there for 10, 12 years. They say it's very unusual for a tree with that many roots exposed to survive, but the tree is still alive. So it tells you just how deep the roots go, and that even though it's hanging off the edge of a cliff, it's still able to pull enough water to survive. I guess one of these days it'll probably come down, but until then, we've got a hanging cedar. I had a couple of geologists and 2 archaeologists that came out here and went on a tour. And I thought it was going to be a great tour. I figured I'd be able to learn a lot from these guys. Boy, was I wrong. They argued the entire time they were out here. Every time I'd start a story, one of them would say, that's not true, we know it's not. Another would say, yes it is, we got journals saying it's true. And the argument would start. And so I got to the point where I was almost afraid to say anything because I knew it was going to start an argument. But the deeper we got out in here, the more these guys began to realize that there are some good-sized cedars out here. And at that time, this big old cedar tree that you see down here, water had washed out from around the roots over there, and it started to fall, but it had leaned up against 3 other cedars. Well, every year, that big old cedar would have pushed those other 3 a little bit more, and we knew sooner or later it was going to all come down. Well, it did this past winter. So it took us a while to clear out this road here. But they thought it was kind of interesting, and still they weren't convinced that, well, I told them, I said, one of the biggest cedars I've seen in the state of Texas is in this little finger of the canyon. Well, it started an argument. One of them said, well, you've obviously never been down around Austin, San Antonio. I said, yes, I have. I lived in both places. I know there's some big cedars down there. But one of the biggest cedars I've seen in Texas is in this finger of the canyon. Oh, well, it can't be. There are bigger cedars out in East Texas. I said, no, there are cedars in East Texas. I'm just telling you, one of the biggest cedars I've seen is in this finger of the canyon. Well, they never did shut up about it. So finally I said, well, gentlemen, you know, if you don't believe me, we'll just take a look at the tree and you can tell me what you think. Well, all right, we'll look at this tree, but I don't believe it's big. You know, there's bigger cedars in different parts of the state. And I said, okay, just look to your right. The guy sitting up here next to me, who is an archaeologist, said, if the story of Coronado coming out here in 1541 is true, the guy in the back said, of course it's true. We know it's true. We got the journals to prove it. The guy up here said, shut up and listen. If that story is true, I'll give you odds that tree was standing when Coronado came out here.
Wow.
That's one of the few things all 4 of them agreed to. That tree was probably standing when he came out here. They even got out and measured the trunk and took photographs and discussed it. And they finally agreed it is one of the biggest cedar trees that they've seen in the state of Texas. The old tree, I'm sure it was hit by lightning several times because it's not alive anymore, but it's one of the biggest cedars I've seen in the state. It's a shame it's dead. I would like to see what the wood inside there looks like. I just don't want to see it enough to cut it down. This is called a Texas thistle. I don't know if you have them down where you are or not. This is a small one.
I don't know.
Very small. I had several years ago, well in fact 4 years ago, which was the last time these things bloomed out here, we had a busload of elderly ladies on tour, and I don't remember where they were going, but they stopped here and all of them wanted to do a tour. So we put, I think we had 5 ladies in each Jeep, and we had either 5 or 6 Jeeps out here. Well, I happened to get one of the oldest ladies on the bus. She was like 92 or 93 years old, and I was thinking, this is just great. And this little frail old lady's gonna have a heart attack out here in the heat, you know, or something's gonna go wrong. I was wrong. She turned out to be the most fun of any of the ladies on tour out here. Anyway, she asked me if I'd pick one of these for her, so I did. Now they were a little bigger than this. It was earlier in the year, and she was looking at this little thing, and she said, you know, I remember when I was a little girl, my mother would go out and pick these. And in the middle of the afternoon, when the old wood-burning stove had cooled off, she'd put these in the oven and dry them out. And she said, this is what we use for powder puffs. She said, I was 20 years old before I knew you could buy a powder puff in a store. And I thought, where can you get information like that, except from the source, you know? So, most of these that you'll see out here today are not alive anymore, they're dead. So I thought it might be a good time, since this one was still alive, just to pick it and show you. But she swore that that was what they used for powder puffs when she was a child. Yep. Don't get that kind of information from a book. A lot of animals out in here. This would have been a great place for the Indians to come and hunt. And we know they did. We find occasionally, we'll find a few arrowheads laying around out in here. This is an unusual part of the canyon though, because of the amount of growth in here. When we get out into the main part of the canyon, you'll see that there aren't big trees like this out there, and it's not quite as green in the main part of the canyon as it is in here. But this is a neat place to come on a hot summer day because it's a little cooler down in here, especially back where there's more shade. We have a number of different kinds of cactus out here. The prickly pear is the most predominant one. But besides the prickly pear, we've got several different types. This one over here to the right with all the light colored thorns on it, that's a member of the cholla family, they tell me. But we have another member of the cholla, and it's the little finger cactus right here with the long thorns on it, has the little red berries on it. They call that a jumping cholla out here. And I never knew why until last summer. I got a little too close to one and it got me. And I thought I was probably 2 or 3 inches away from it, but I still ended up with 4 of those thorns in the calf of my leg. And those little thorns are just covered with barbs, so every time you move they work a little deeper. By the time I got up to the top, I had to get a pair of pliers to pull those out of my leg with. Hurt, man, those things hurt. Some people call them Christmas tree cactus because of the red berries on there, but they are a member of the cholla, and that's one member that you don't want to mess with. They will